Welcome to the Awaken Heart Podcast. I'm your host, Nancy Walters. Get ready to create magic and miracles as you lean into your heart's desires. I believe not only does the heart want what it wants, but it knows. This show is a weekly deep dive into what it means to live from an awakened heart. I'll be sharing inspiring stories and real conversations with people just like you, who have turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. My mission is to show you how you too can be connected and heart-centered in every area of your life. Your journey to aligning with more love, more joy, and your wildest dreams come true starts now. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Awaken Heart Podcast. I hope everyone is doing really well out there. It's been a minute since I've been able to put out an episode. I've been able to record a lot of amazing conversations over the last couple of months, but I've been so consumed with a lot of family stuff that I haven't been able to get to editing them and actually putting an episode out. So this is the first one I've been able to do since August. It's been a couple months. I try to always put them out bi-monthly. I've got a lot of conversations that are lined up, and I think I'm going to try to put these out every week because now I finally have the time to go back and edit them and produce them and get them out to you listeners. So yeah, I've had a lot of family stuff going on, and I've been able to finally resolve a lot of it, and it's been sorted, it's been settled. You know, there's still some hurdles to leap, but it's finally starting to quiet down. So today's conversation is the first one of many that I have for you. And we're joined by Patty Cabot, who is the author of Not That Girl Anymore, which is a deeply personal memoir about her journey to reclaim happiness and healing after years of drastic weight fluctuations and the unresolved trauma that shaped her life. Patty shares the alternative therapies that helped her transform from EMDR and chiropractic work to sex therapy and group support, offering inspiration to anyone striving to overcome their own past. This episode dives into her powerful story of resilience and the unconventional healing methods that made it possible. Hey, Patty, welcome to the Awaken Heart Podcast.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited about our conversation. I think it's a really important topic to really talk about. You've really overcome a lot. And I think what we have to talk about today can help a lot of people that might have been in a similar situation. There's a lot of what is happening as far as trauma and then internalizing it and then weight gain, sexual trauma, all that. And you have a really almost heroic story. I read a little bit of your book, and you had a lot to overcome in childhood where everything might look all hunky-dory on the outside, and then in the inside, there's all this turmoil happening. And without giving the book away, you had your parents. Was it the third marriage, or she got married three times, or?
She did, but it was actually my stepfather. So I was
Yeah.
sexually abused growing up, primarily by my stepfather, to a lesser extent, a cousin as well.
Yes. And it's really a compelling story. And so you have a personal journey with how your teenage years, because of this trauma and not knowing that it was this sexual trauma, you had a battle with gaining weight, like between 50 and 75 pounds every 2 years, or?
Every 2 years. And I will say, so it happened when I was younger. And, just as you talked about with trauma, it was one of those things I never thought about. I just, when you grow up and things happen to you, it's your perception of normal, right? Or even if it's not normal, it's still a great big secret. So you don't talk about it. You certainly don't think about it. You don't process it. You're really focused on getting through the day. And I think as I entered my teenage years, and when you start to kind of have that awakening, I think that's suddenly when everything came into play for me, and I started gaining and losing large amounts of weight, as you said, 50 to 75 pounds every 2 years. And I did it for 20 years, and I never knew why. I mean, and I was a great dieter, truly, and I would always lose the weight, but then I would regain it. And it's not rocket science, right? Like, it's not rocket science to maintain it, but I couldn't. And it was only when I went to find help with an eating disorder that I kind of met this therapist, and she went through my history, and she was like, your weight is just a symptom of your childhood sexual abuse. And that was the point where I really started to deal with my childhood.
Mhm. So, can you give our audience a little background, about you wrote this book, Not This That Girl Anymore, which is available now, correct?
Yes, it is available.
Okay.
And you can download it for free from my
Mhm.
website at
Amazing.
pattycabot.com. So, it's interesting. When I started therapy, I was in my late 30s at that point. And, while I was always aware of my sexual abuse, it was very shameful. And I felt ruined by it. And I didn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't tell my friends. In fact, I was in therapy for 3 years before I told any of my friends. So it was just really my cross to bear. And I think that's not unusual either. And when I started therapy and we started mining my past, and this was something I never wanted to think about, I found the whole process so difficult. And I'm actually a writer. So I would go home and I would write about my sessions as a way to process them. And not to ruin the story for anybody, but I ended up being in therapy for 12 years. I started out with a therapist who specialized in eating disorders, but her specialty was also EMDR, which is a kind of therapy that really deals with trauma. And it was just, the universe wanted it to happen that I found this therapist who worked with people on eating disorders who also had this specialty in trauma. And over the years, while I made great progress with her, I tried different kinds of therapy as well. And my book really is a distillation about all of my different kinds of therapies that I explored to ultimately open myself to love, which was the goal of me losing weight. And I know
Mm.
that was a lot that I just threw at you.
No, that's great. So, I know that you had a bunch of different therapists like you had talked about, and then the one that led you to the one that helped you overcome this was when you were in your late 30s, and that was the EMDR and chiropractic care. So, EMDR is like motion with the eyes, it has to do with, and I know there's a bunch of different modalities, and then chiropractic, does that when you're adjusted, does that release emotions that are stuck in the muscles or in the bones in the body?
So yeah, that's a great question. So EMDR, which I had never heard of, is electromagnetic desensitization reprocessing. It's called EMDR. And basically it can be different things. And the easier way to think about it is, because I had never heard of it. I had never heard of any of the therapies that I ultimately ended up exploring, is that your thoughts and feelings like travel on a track, like a train travels on a track. And when you have trauma, it's an explosion that throws everything off the track. So everything that's happening is just floating around in space. And EMDR is supposed to bring it all back to the track so you can make sense of it, process it, and move on. So if you think about veterans from foreign conflicts or local conflicts, if they hear a car backfiring, if they were in a war zone, it brings them back because it's a trigger. Something else reminds them of something that happened to them, and it's like they feel it all over again even though the threat's not now. And that's what happens with trauma. People get triggered by things that have happened in the past, but they just have no awareness, or they're not making the connection
Mhm.
that one thing is triggering another. So that was kind of EMDR. And I found EMDR tremendously helpful, but EMDR really relies on feelings in the body. So it's kind of a dual track where it's like your thoughts and feelings in your head, but also things you're feeling in your body. And I really couldn't access feelings. And I think that's not unusual either. People, no matter what stripe your trauma is, people repress, right? You repress what's painful. You don't think about it. You tamp it down, you tamp it down, you tamp it down. And even if it's not really bubbling to the surface, it's always right below. It's
Mhm.
always there. And the the heart of it is to kind of mine that and to feel what you need to feel so you can move past it. So that was really a very difficult thing for me to learn how to feel, and not only to feel, to not be afraid to feel, and then to identify what I was feeling. And I would say when I had been in EMDR, we made great progress, but my real goal always behind my weight loss was to find love, because I felt that my weight gain kept me from meeting people, which is
Mhm.
nonsense, but you latch on to what the most obvious thing is. I found myself unacceptable, assumed all men found me unacceptable. But it was always about finding love. And when I lost the weight, I maintained the weight, and I still didn't have love. Like, obviously, it wasn't the magic bullet I had hoped it would be. And my therapist and I explored other therapies to try to get me unstuck. And the first one we tried, and she was always with me, was chiropractic care. And that was fascinating because I had never heard of it. I live in New York City. There's everything under the sun here. And basically, what it is, it's very gentle taps on your spine. And the thinking is that
Mm,
everything that happens to you is stored in the body, right?
it is, yeah.
And
Samsara too.
yeah, exactly. And so there's actually a book, The Body Keeps the Score. No matter what happens to you, it's always in your body. And so this chiropractor, it really is about like releasing all of these things. And when he first met me and he examined me and he said, you are completely rigid. Your body is locked in a constant fight or flight response. So it's about letting that go. And interestingly enough, I never understood how what he did worked. I still don't know how he did what he did work, but I started to feel feelings, which was terrifying, but it was such a necessary step to like learn what you feel and like how it makes you feel and to not be afraid to sit with it.
Hmm. So he did tapping. So he's a chiropractor. I had somebody like this when I used to go in Beverly Hills when I lived in California, and I had an injury. And it wasn't the traditional, I've gone to chiro and they kind of do the same cracking, but he put, he'd go into like do cranial work. He'd go into my ear. He'd go, rub stuff on my jaw and it would kill. He'd put me on blocks and stuff. I mean, he healed me. I'm like, what are you, witch doctor? He looked like somebody from like Game of Thrones. He was like hot, let's just say the least. So it was always like, oh, you Viking, you. But yeah, so they do things like when they're tapping on your spine, that's releasing stuff that's stored within your body. How many times did you have to go until you started feeling some kind of shift in your emotional and what you're able to access emotionally?
Yeah, I do just want to clarify that he didn't. I've never been to a traditional chiropractor, but it was
Mhm.
truly very light taps. Like there was
Yep.
never any cracking, and it really was my
Mhm.
spine.
Yes.
So I think it was different in that respect. So it was interesting. What he did is he had open office hours where you could go in 3 days a week and they're short sessions. They're like 15 minutes. There were other people there, which was freaky to me. And he's just walking around the room doing these light
Uh-huh.
taps on the body, and I
Wow.
started feeling things immediately
Wow.
immediately. And I was a very controlled person.
Mhm.
I'm still controlling, but not as bad. Nowhere near as bad. I'm much more flexible than I used to be, and I found it terrifying. Like feeling things was very scary for me. And I grew up in a household full of anger. So I've always been very comfortable with anger. Anger is also a very mobilizing emotion. You can do something with anger. But sadness, grief, sorrow, those were things that I was very uncomfortable with. And I was afraid I would drown in my emotion.
Mhm.
So it was really difficult. And I hated to be vulnerable. And, it was interesting. The longer I worked with him, the more I felt, the more he became my target because it was like he was the one who was making me
Mhm.
feel these things. And I was so resentful in so many ways, even though I knew he was helping me. And I was so biting and mean to him that I ended up having to have numerous conversations with him apologizing because I felt so guilty. And he would always reassure me. He's like, "You're fine." And he was like, "The process is like an eggshell cracking and it's frightening." And he's
Mhm.
like, "You should never be afraid of your growth or how it makes me feel." He's like, "I'm so happy that you feel like you can tell me how you feel." So it was like such a good experience in that way and
Mhm.
so necessary, so necessary.
Mhm. So he's probably experienced that with people, like, turning on him. "Oh, yeah, that's normal."
Y-
Yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause
exactly, exactly. And it's interesting too, we were talking very briefly about triggers. It's always helpful to think like if you have any kind of interaction with somebody and you think they respond in a way that just doesn't make sense to whatever the conversation is, it's always helpful to think, what could I have triggered in them that is making them behave this way? Because it
mm,
likely has nothing to do with you,
mhm,
but something that makes them feel something else.
mhm. It's triggering something in them that has nothing to do with the situation, but it's something that they've experienced or felt in the past or they believe about themselves. Isn't it funny,
Exactly.
these triggers? It's like they can come out of nowhere, and it's like, "Why am I getting so irritated? Why am I getting so, like, the defensive?" I feel I know in my life, a lot of times I feel defensive about so many things and it just doesn't make sense because we're just having a normal conversation or they're telling me to go right and I want to go left and I'm getting triggered by it. It's just, and I understand the control because I've felt that a lot in my life. And I've had hypnotherapy. I've done so many kind of alternative like healing. My money went to that kind of stuff, anything outside of the regular medical system. And I've tried so many different things and I've tried to get hypnotized. And I had the blocks. Like had past life regressions and they only could get to a certain point and then a wall. I've been better with my emotions in the last decade, I'd say, because I really took a lot of time after my last breakup to really re-examine anything. It's been 10 years since that. The emotions that come up can be absolutely just not even related to, what you're experiencing in the moment. It's crazy. But yeah, I'd have the blocks. Like literally, I'd feel like a boyfriend would ask me, oh, well, ask me something. And I just literally, here goes this wall. I can't emote what I'm actually feeling because I felt so vulnerable. And like you were saying about anger, you understood anger because there was a lot of it in your household and you felt it. Well, anger is covering up for like, sadness and fear and all that. It's easier to be angry than to really acknowledge those other emotions, grief, guilt, fear, shame. And so anger covers that up. So you were able to, you felt like you might drown in those emotions. How did you, when those emotions did come up, especially in the beginning, how did would you just let them out and let yourself emote them and feel them in order to release them?
I would say honestly, it took me a long time. I was in therapy with my main therapist in EMDR for 6 years before I
Mm-hmm.
started chiropractic care. So a long time. I had a very difficult time. It took me 3 years to tell anybody about my story, and these were my close friends. So I was very closed, and I did find it very, very difficult. And I will say this: it's like anything else. If you want to play the piano, chances are you're not going to be fantastic day one. It takes practice and everything you do gets easier with practice. And it got easier and easier to feel and sit with my emotions. And, my therapist and I worked on that a lot because she would say to me, she's like, you have to let them wash through you and over you for them to move beyond.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a hard thing to learn to do. But once you do learn how to do it, it's like, okay, you really do resolve them as opposed to this perpetual cycle of tamping it down, moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
tamping it down. It's like you resolve it and it's over. I mean, it might
Mm-hmm.
feel crappy for a few minutes, but then, okay, but now it's done.
Yeah, it's a release and it's a release. You just let it feel it. And then I went through that a breakup the years ago. And I think for a month, like it would just come up. I'd be out doing Pilates and all of a sudden I'd hear a song. I'm like, oh my God, I got to cry. And I'd, ugly
Exactly.
cry in my closet. So my neighbors downstairs wouldn't hear me. Yeah. And then it was gone and it became less and less and less, letting that stored emotions down. That might not even be done. It might not have even been because of the current breakup. It was a lot of stuff that was stored in there for a long time. Even, maybe it's generational. Maybe it's like, stuff that isn't even from this lifetime because there's a lot of stuff that we're carrying around that isn't even from this lifetime or if isn't even ours. It's a collective
Mm.
mourning. Hmm.
I agree. And I think too that for me, one of the most, so I explored a lot of different therapies. One of the ones that I found to be most transformative for me, truly, and I did a lot of stuff that I thought was great, was meditation. And I'm
Mm.
a runner and I was in constant pain. And so 3 people in a week were like, do you meditate? Do you meditate? And I'm like, that's a sign from the universe. I should start meditating. And it was somehow the most powerful thing I've done. And I think it was because meditation is all about now. It's about being present,
Mhm.
not ruminating on the past, not worrying about the future. And people tend to either look backwards or forwards. And I was always looking forward. I was going to game the next move. I was going to, make sure that I had every scenario that could
Kept you
possibly
safe.
be. Exactly, exactly. But 90% of it never comes to pass, right? And what ends up happening is you're not present now. And so meditation is really about now. And
Mhm.
what I like to remind myself of, when you and I were talking about our cat before,
Mhm.
when my sweet, darling, beloved Olive, who is in my book, was sick and she was sick at the end. She lived to be 19 and a half.
She's
I
the one that
really
smacked your leg when you what? Yeah, you went
Yeah,
by or yeah.
yeah, she found me when I went to go
Yes.
look for her at the shelter. And what was fascinating is like I found meditation so helpful at that point because I would think, "She's okay right now, and all that matters is this moment." It's
Mhm.
like being present in this moment. How are things right now? Right now is okay. You know what? I'll worry about the minute from now when I'm in it, as opposed to investing all of that emotion and fear and, whatever the situation might be. It's really about just being present and how is now. And if now's okay, great. Great.
Mhm.
Worry about tomorrow when you get there.
W I I actually was just gifted a amazing meditation package from one of my earlier guests that I really need to dive in with a kit with crystals and stones for the chakra and sage and all that. I have been needing to get back into a meditation practice probably for the last 6 months or even a year because I recently did a big move across country, moved back to Michigan, getting everything settled. Now I've got new kittens and stuff. But, yeah. So I really need to get back into a practice. And it's really like I feel myself in my mind. I even got up and like usually I'll read or do some, I think since the winter when I was journaling after my beloved Taz passed, I was doing a lot of intention, a lot of that. But I've been so in my head, especially with what is going on in the world. Like I've been obsessed, without getting into politics, but it's upside down world. And I find myself like really afraid and I'm fearing for the future and all this stuff that's coming, but we can't control those things. We can only control what we have in the moment, what's here and right now. And I mean, we could do our part, do inspired action, but it's such a waste of energy to go into like all the narratives and all the crap that's going on in the world. So I find it's really important for people as a collective, as a world to really get back into some kind of meditation practice. Because I've always found that when you do your meditation, it helps you the rest of the day. It helps you like not be so reactive to little things and see things more in perspective. You just have a much better day. You have a much better outlook on life. You just are more present to what is in this moment because right here in this moment, we're okay. We have a roof over our head, we've got air conditioning on, we got
Exactly.
clothes. And when you have a
Exactly.
pet, you're just like, oh, here's my, they're relaxed in the moment. Let me enjoy petting their fur. But what is there a particular meditation that you use or
So,
practice?
so when I started meditating, Headspace was just coming out at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
Headspace had done this thing at the time where basically you got 10 free days, and it taught you how to kind of clear your mind so that you could ultimately meditate. So it was like
Mm-hmm.
meditation for dummies, and it was great. And I had gone through all their guided meditations within a year, and this was a long time ago, so they really didn't have, I think, kind of the arsenal of stuff they have now. And at that time that I was done, I started looking online for other guided meditations. And honestly, I just never found anything that resonated with me in the same way. So when I would do the Headspace meditations, they were 11 minutes. And so all I've
Perfect.
done ever since then is I do my own thing. I set a timer on my computer for 11 minutes and I meditate in the way that I believe meditation to be. And I think it's interesting to say that meditation is a practice, like yoga is a practice. There's never perfection. You're never going to
Mm-mm.
attain some vaunted status. It's constantly evolving. And what works for me may not work for you. And that's okay because I find it really helpful for me the way I do it.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's just very much like me talking to God in the universe, and that's how I meditate.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
and I will say too, one of the things that I started doing many years ago as well that I love and I hope do until I die is first thing in the morning when I first open my eyes and before I close them at night, I thank God in the universe for what I am grateful for.
Mhm,
And I think it's just such a positive way to remind ourselves that there are people, and I know outside my door, outside your door, who don't have a place to live, who don't have
mhm,
food, who don't have jobs, who don't have family, that don't have. So it's nice to remind ourselves of what we do have.
mhm. Now for your gratitude, do you write it down or do you say it? Because I have a problem with writing. Feel like I have
Oh no,
carpal
I don't
tunnel
write it
syndrome.
down.
Okay, because 'cause I'm
I don't
like,
I don't write it
oh.
down. I don't write it down. And we talked about Olive. Olive, I used to call her my moonbeam, and she is
Mhm.
always the first
Aw,
and last thing. I am thank you for the gift
great.
of my
Mhm.
moonbeam. Like she is forever
Mm,
with me. She passed away, but I am bound to her for this life and every lifetime
mhm,
that follows. So
mhm. They're our little angels, our little soul. They're little souls that come here and grace us with their time and presence, our guardians too. So,
exactly. And I
yeah.
do feel that way every time I see a bird outside my window. I'm like, it's
Yes.
her.
Yes. Yes, I go on walks. Luckily, where I live, there's deer everywhere. So, like, I had 3 deer over in my path the other day, and,
Oh.
yeah, there's so much wildlife out here. It's pretty awesome. But yeah, meditation, that's even athletes, all the successful people, it's meditation. Oh, and then also they do one where you visualize, like you visualize yourself successful, you visualize
Yes.
yourself healed, and you believe in this moment. Like instead of like I am going to be, it's like I am healed, I am blessed. How many grateful things do you say? Do you have a list or
I
because?
so it's funny. I do always start with Olive, and now I
Hmm.
was telling you, I shared with you, I have a puppy that I
Yes.
feel like Olive found her for us, and she is on my list, although she's a handful. And
What
then I
kind?
really, she's a German Shepherd mix. She's
Oh,
sleeping
she's
right
a
now, or
big
I'd
one.
show you.
Oh, mhm.
Yeah, and she's a beauty. But
Yeah.
Olive was the most gorgeous girl there was, so there was not like there was going to be anything ugly that she was going to choose for us.
Yes.
She's a very sweet girl. So there's just, and I feel like I am very grateful for the big and the small, like small things that, it's funny. One of the things about when I was in therapy, I always felt alone, right? Because I didn't share anything about myself, even though I had a lot of friends. Nobody knew anything about me. So I always felt very alone. And one of the things that happened when I started meditating was I had read this great book called The Boys in the Boat, and it's a true story about the 1936 Olympics men's rowing team. And I'm not generally a nonfiction
Oh,
reader, but
I think
there
that's
was a
on.
movie about it recently,
Yeah.
and it was an amazing book, and the lead in the book, he has this horrible childhood, just truly horrible, and he wrote about when he was on this rowing team, when he was with he called them the boys in his boat, and he was like, he felt like he was in swing, like when he was in swing with his team, he knew nothing could hurt him. And I had been running, and I thought, I wish I had a team that I could be in swing with, and I thought, oh, I'm in swing with the universe. And I do feel that way. I feel very connected to
Hmm.
the universe, and that makes me the most grateful because I don't ever feel alone anymore. And
Mhm.
that is for people who struggle with there's no one there, there's no one who understands me or feels me. Like, to not feel alone is huge.
Mhm. Yeah, you're always feeling supported because we are never alone. We just don't
Exactly.
recognize how we are supported in every way all
Yeah,
day. Yeah.
yeah.
And in recognizing that, it just brings more of that support in. So,
Exactly,
mhm.
exactly, and even as you were talking about the athletes and other people who visualize and all the rest of it, it's that saying, "Fake it till you make it." So if
Mhm.
you walk out into the world with a smile and an open heart, at some point it becomes real.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. Now, for your healing process, I know that you had gone to group therapy and it was really hard to, at first, you said to even talk about it. You were in therapy for a long time, even able to acknowledge that this happened to you or let your friends know and whatnot. And then you went to group therapy for sexual abuse. How did that impact your recovery compared to individual therapy?
So, interestingly enough, I had actually been in therapy in my mid 20s, and it was
Hmm.
for more than just my weight. It was about my weight. I always hated my jobs and I had issues with men. And I was really very, very unhappy at that point. And I was in therapy for 7 years and with a therapist, and I went twice a week, and we really just dealt with the here and now. We never looked back, never looked back. And she helped a lot because I was really very, very unhappy. Fast forward 10 years or so, and I go into therapy again, this time with the woman who did EMDR. One of the first things she suggested to me was group therapy, and it was a hard no. I was not at all open to it. And I will say, as somebody who has been on a million diets and Weight Watchers, ruled the day, and I had been on Weight Watchers a million times, I hated the meetings. And back before everything was digital and online, you had to go to meetings in person. And I hated kind of the whining about, I want to eat brownies and drink margaritas. Yeah, I do too, but that's not going to foster my weight loss goals. So I have a low threshold for people
Hmm.
whining about,
Hmm.
whatever. And that was what I feared group therapy was going to be, people whining about their situation. And I grew up in a family where hysterics and all the rest of it. Anyway, so it was the first thing she suggested, and I said no. So it ended up being the last thing I did because I really was very resistant. So it was like year 9 that I actually did group therapy, and 2 things came out of it. It ended up by sheer coincidence in the universe and the way it works. It was my original therapist from my 20s who led the group,
Wow.
who had no idea about my past. And I worked with her for
Wow.
7 years.
Wow.
We never talked about it. Never
Oh my
talked about it.
god.
Yeah, so that was fascinating that, like, it brought us full circle together. Um, And group therapy ended up being amazing
Mhm.
because it was the first time in my life I ever talked to anybody who had remotely similar
So
experiences
you
to
didn't feel
mine.
alone in yours.
Exactly, and my therapist had wanted me to find community, and I did. I found
Mhm.
community, and it was invaluable. I ultimately, again, no spoiler, but I wanted to find love, and I kept trying all these different things because I made all this progress, but couldn't find love. I still couldn't open myself to love, and it was when I was in group therapy that I finally met somebody. Like I
Mhm.
finally achieved what I wanted, and it was so helpful to have this group of people who understood how I felt.
Mhm.
'Cause it was terrifying. It was very, very scary to be with someone, and as my therapist would say to me, she's like, "You defended against this your whole life, like, this
Mhm.
whole that someone can hurt you again."
Mhm. Mm.
So, it was really helpful, but it was a
Well,
hard sell to get me there.
right. Well, you got there. And it's so important to understand a lot of people that are in like abusive relationships or narcissistic abuse, like you feel like you're the only one, it's your fault. There's so much shame in it and all that confusion in the group therapy. It's like, okay, well, some people have even worse situations. Like
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
like
And I yeah, yeah,
mm,
no, absolutely, and I do think it's that too, that it is people who understand and that they get where you're coming from. And it's interesting what you had just said too, like you feel like you're the only one, you feel like it's your fault. And I think that was the big thing with me. I always felt like what happened to me was my fault, which of course it wasn't. I was a child. But children internalize everything as being their fault, right? And especially if
mhm,
nobody's taking accountability, I think it's very natural to feel like it's your fault. And when you talk to someone else and you hear their story, you're like, "Of course it's not your fault." And then you can think, "Wow, is it mine then?" I mean,
mhm,
I think it helps you shift the perspective in
mhm,
a way.
mhm. And as kids, yours started, I mean, it went till you were about 10. And I know from 1 to 7, you're like a literal sponge for your environment.
Exactly, exactly. And I think again the problem there too is that, and not again just for sexual abuse, any kind of abuse, when you grow up in an abusive home, whether it's verbal, physical, sexual, neglect, it doesn't matter what I mean it matters, but it doesn't really matter what it is. It becomes your template for normal, which is why so many people choose abusive partners, right? It's what you know. And even though it's not normal, it's what you're used to. So it seems like it's
Mhm,
normal.
mhm,
And
mhm.
it's not. It's not.
No, no, and so, all too many people go through this kind of experience in their childhood. I mean, I was lucky I was raised by amazing parents, but, I heard about a lot of it when I'd go into acting classes because I lived in
Oh,
California, and I was like, people go up there and tell their stories. I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm so lucky." Oh my god, it's just, like, horrifying stories, like, and that's, like, a lot of Hollywood has unresolved trauma, and that's how they're able to get into all these different personalities and all these different scenarios because 'cause they're hiding a lot who they really are. A lot of them in Hollywood need to go to therapy. So what
well,
it yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, one of the things that I found out, much later is 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys are sexually abused. So if you look
Wow,
left, look
Jesus
right, it's
Christ.
one of you. It's
Wow.
unbelievable. It's horrible.
Mm,
It's horrible. So it's so common, and I wanted to take my secret to the grave. I mean, I'm glad I'm not, but I think a lot of people live that way where they're like, it's too shameful to tell.
mhm. And if you think about it, when we were in grade school or maybe we're in junior high or high school, I'm thinking about how there's always, like, that weird student where they're kind of isolated, they're alone, they're just a little odd, and to think that they're probably being abused in their household. And how mean kids are, and if we could have just been a little more empathetic, maybe we
Yes.
should be taught to be a little more empathetic in schools to these kids that are a little bit odd or they dress differently or they're quiet or whatnot, and, I think back and there's, a couple of people that I can pretty much pinpoint that they had problems in their household.
And I think that's probably also true for bullies. Like, what's
Mhm.
happening to a
Yeah.
bully at
Oh god.
home? I
Mhm.
mean, I think it's just so sad, and kids are mean and horrible, and
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, if I was a parent, are you a parent? Do you have kids?
No, I do not.
Me neither. Me neither, and I swear to God, if my child came home and told me it was getting bullied, I think I'd be, like, Ramboing on Mama Bear would come out, and I'd be just going right up to that household with the little kid, by the collar. Just I can't imagine that. Yeah, so, all right, well, let's get to your book real quick before
Okay.
we wrap this up, because this is what inspired you to write this book. Like, I want to know what inspired you to do this. I mean, this is why you're out talking about it, your journey to help shed light on how people can heal from trauma and the weight loss that you gain, or whatever it is might be in someone's life. There's something underlying that is causing some kind of addiction issue or some sadness or some, being stuck in life.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that inspired you to write Not That Girl Anymore. And how did writing the memoir contribute to your healing journey? And what was the writing process for you like?
So, and again, just as background, so I started therapy because of my weight. And it was
Mhm.
a big aha moment to me to have somebody say, it's not about your weight that's causing the issues. It's a symptom, not the cause. And then we redirected, and I spent 12 years in therapy trying to resolve my childhood trauma so that I could ultimately open myself to love, which I did. And I will also say, from my heaviest, I am 100 pounds lighter, and I've maintained it for
Wow.
15 years and counting. Like, I never gained it back, knock wood, thank God, but which is a great thing. So it really was never about my weight. It was just about the secrets that I was keeping.
Mhm.
And because I was keeping these secrets, as I mentioned, when I started therapy, I shared nothing. So I would come
Hmm.
home. The only person who knew my story was my therapist. So I would come
Mhm.
home and I would write about every session as a way to process it. And I did it for 12 years.
Wow.
And at the end of 12 years, I finally met somebody in them, but entering into a relationship was very scary for me. And I was so happy and so afraid. And it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was so much to marvel, to navigate my way through, that I still continued to write. Every time I saw him, I would come home and write about it.
Mhm.
And it was after we had been together for a few months where I thought, wow, who's walked the same path as me? Like
Mhm.
that I finally did it. I got to the other side. It was like always my dream to get to the other side, and that's how I saw it. I would get to the other side of where I was. And I finally got there. And I had decided to take my 1,200 pages of writings, because that's what it was. It was
Mm.
1,200 pages. And I decided to write a book. And it's funny because I never thought about publishing it. I was like, I'm sure the exercise is for me. And then maybe it was like, I'll share it with my friends, whatever it was going to be. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger until a couple of years later, I was like, wow, I should actually just publish the book. Because again, what I always hoped was possible, but there were a good many years where I feared it wasn't. And I didn't want anybody else to think that whatever their aspirational dreams were for themselves, that it wasn't possible because of what happened to them. So that is why I ultimately wrote the book, Not That Girl Anymore, because I'm not that girl anymore. I am not who I had been. And I think the hardest lesson for me, and one of the reasons I was in therapy for so long, was that I could never shake the intractable belief that it was my fault. I always felt
Mhm.
ruined by what happened to me, and what I wanted was for it to be undone because I feared there was no way to redemption for me otherwise. And ultimately, what you learn in therapy is that it's not about disavowing your past, but about integrating and accepting so that you
Mhm.
can move forward. And I finally got there. Like, I
Mhm.
integrated and accepted. It's
Mhm.
part and parcel of who I am. And once I was able to do that, it doesn't hurt me anymore, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't need to be my secret anymore. And I would say that was a hard lesson to learn, but it is true. It is not my blame, it's not my shame, and it's not my secret to keep.
Mhm. Mhm. So taking that burden off you that it's yours to carry alone and living alongside of it. So like you don't get rid of it, you don't erase the past, but you learn to
No,
live alongside of it without carrying that guilt around
exactly,
that.
because it's shaped the person I was to become. I mean, there's no way around that. It's shaped who I am. And you asked if I have children, and I don't. I never married. I mean, I hope that I will someday.
Mhm.
But we don't get to live the same life. I mean, it'd be great if we all had the happy fantasy of, finding our prince or princess or gender neutral person,
Mhm.
or whatever we think the fantasy life is. But that's not how life works, right? So you make the best of what you have, and you look for the things that are really wonderful and good and focus on those. And
Mhm.
I think, you accept the things that happen to you and try to make sense of them to the extent that they can be made sense of. I mean, crazy, senseless, thoughtless, nonsensical things happen to us, and it's unfortunate. But again, that's life. There's pain, right?
Mhm.
And you
Yeah.
just have to make the best of it, or,
Mhm.
and you hear amazing stories about people who suffer these incredible tragedies, and you're like, wow, how how do they keep going? But they do. Like people who do great things in the
Mhm.
world because they are informed by their own experiences, and they want to make the world better.
Mhm.
I don't know how I went off on that. I apologize.
No, I think it's great. It's because what's happening in the world right now, I see, and it feels like it's becoming more and more this victim mentality. Yes, people can be victims in situations, but we all have the ability to overcome once we put the commitment to ourselves. Like we make a commitment to ourselves and our happiness, and I think this is something really important somehow to be taught in kids. I wish the whole curriculum that's being taught with kids, I think there just needs to be a whole new schooling as far as maybe teaching them emotional intelligence, meditation, how to overcome trauma, which would be really important for them, or, household, like balancing budgets, all this stuff to really make these kids become these humans that can really handle with intelligence whatever's thrown at them in their lifetime and not be stuck in this victim mentality. Because I think we're luckily, at least right now, we're in this country, really, whatever our circumstances, whatever we're born into, we can absolutely overcome it and become anything really we want to, despite, race, religion, creed, live in the Appalachians, whatever, we can overcome them when we really decide to and do the therapies and do the steps that you did. If you can't do it on your own, you get the help that you need, which you did. You committed to it for years and you overcame it. And it's still a work in progress. And you wrote this book to help other people.
Hey, but it's interesting because you raised so many excellent points there. But I think that it is true, like everybody's a winner kind of mentality now, which I find maddening because everybody's not a
Exactly.
winner, and
No,
that's
we're
not how
not.
life works. That's
No,
not how
we,
life
we
works.
need to be taught to
So
lose,
Exactly. We need to be
lose
taught
with
to lose,
grace.
and
Mm-hmm.
yes, exactly right. But I do think one of the great things about now, and it's because the world is so wired and connected. I'm 57, and when I
Mm-hmm.
was growing up, oh my God, nobody talked about what we talk about now.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely nobody. It was a secret for life, and that is not a good thing, right? So I think in that respect, it's so much better now in that there are so many
Mm-hmm.
places to get support anonymously
Mm-hmm.
for free. And that really shouldn't be an impediment to anybody. I mean, I went to private therapy, but there are so many therapies that you can access for free online in your
Mm-hmm.
community, however you want to. And so that you don't have to feel alone, so that you don't have to struggle through it by yourself, that there is someone else out there, which is great. I think those are amazing things. I think though, it's interesting too that, we're limited by our own perspective. So if we, and this is not a great analogy, but if you grow up in a household where nobody reads, chances are you're not going to read, right? Because you don't see it. It's not normalized for you. Whereas if you do grow up in a house full of readers, chances are you're going to read too. And reading is a great thing. So I think a lot of people, especially if they grow up in a home where people are very, standoffish about therapy, or it's shameful or whatever, that becomes a barrier to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is about opening your eyes to the broader, excuse me, perspective, and seeing what's out there, and not dismissing things just because it's not your experience or you're not used to it, but
Mm-hmm.
trying to be as open minded as you possibly can.
Yes. Well, just a few more questions before we wrap up this podcast because I can see we're getting close to the hour. And I've loved everything we talked about. I'm sure my audience is going to get a lot out of this conversation. I would love to hear, what are your future goals, both personally and professionally, after publishing your memoir?
That's an interesting one because I would have sworn up and down that I did not write the book for myself. That I really didn't. I wrote it to help other people. It's available for free on my website. I wasn't looking for fame, for fortune, for anything. I just want to let people know that no matter what you think your challenge is, if you were sexually abused, if you struggle with your weight and you can't figure out what your why, that there might be some underlying cause, and that hopefully my book would resonate and make you feel hopeful that you can achieve whatever it is you want to achieve. But it's interesting in the time that since it was published, while I had told my close friends my story, I didn't tell anybody else. And as it was
Mm,
getting closer and closer to publication, I realized if I wanted anyone to see it, I had to start telling people. And telling people was really interesting because I kind of had three responses. One was, "That's horrible. I'm so sorry for you." The second one was, I'm sorry, that's horrible for you. And by the way, me too, which is heartbreaking how many people that was. And then the third one was like deer in the headlights. People didn't know what to do or say. And I don't know what anybody's history is. It could be triggering for them. You just don't know the path that someone else has walked. But I was really indignant for a while that as pervasive as childhood sexual abuse is, and it is, again, 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys,
My God.
that it still happens and we still don't talk about it. It is like the last great taboo as far as I'm concerned. It is the secret that shall not be spoken. And not to pick on any religion because it happens in every religion, it happens in every kind of sport, it happens anywhere where you have groups of people, that there is this permissiveness almost of like sexually abusing children. Like, how does it still go on?
I
How do
know.
we still tolerate it? It boggles the mind that it still happens and we
Yes.
still don't talk about it. So I would say to you, my hope had been that there would have been a larger conversation about that so that we could start finally saying no more, no
Hmm.
more. But I'm feeling less optimistic about that.
Well, just what's happening in a domestic household, we've also got the trafficking of children that's happening,
Yes,
and with the
yes,
border being open, there's 100,000 kids that are missing that are literally delivered into the cartels and their abusers' hands. That's a whole other story, and nobody's talking
exactly.
about it because
No,
they're
no.
making money off of it. It's horrific. We don't talk about these things. These
Yeah,
poor
exactly.
children. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. We don't. Or the children that are in foster care that we're
Yes.
supposed to
Oh
be
my
helping.
God.
Exactly. It goes on and on and on. But as much as we like to say the children are our future, really, because we don't seem that interested in them.
No, we don't. And now we're trying to change them. And I know Paris Hilton has been I really respect her for really coming out and really talking about it. I mean, she was older when the abuse happened because there's all these homes and that they really do like almost MK Ultra monarch crazy stuff in these homes. So much abuse happening in these like wayward bound type things, kind of where they go and they kind of parents used to send their kids away where they
Or
would be
boarding schools, very
yes,
elite schools too. Like, it
yeah,
doesn't matter. It crosses all
yes,
socioeconomic lines. It crosses all genders, colors,
yep, mhm,
economic status. None of it matters. What matters is that you have pliable children, right?
mhm.
And that's anybody that's up to 18, right? Like, they're children. They're children.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Now, I know that you didn't let anyone really know your secret for the longest time, but I did read that you did was it you and your sister that did let your mom know when you were around 8 that
Yes.
Terry was abusing you? And then she ended up divorcing him, right? Or
Yes. Yes. It was a couple of years later that she divorced him. Yes, we did tell my mother.
and she
And that was
stopped.
it's funny, they went into couples therapy,
No,
which
you're
back in the
done.
day, yeah, and it took her a while and she divorced him. But I will say this, when I was in group therapy, there was a woman in there who said to me, she's like, "Your story sounds just like mine, except her mother never divorced her stepfather and was married
Wow.
to him still."
Oh my god, protect your
Exactly,
children.
and she was in her 30s at that point, and her relationship with her mother was so fragmented because
Mhm.
her mother chose her abuser over her.
Yes, yes. Did the abuse continue even after she found out? Not the person in
Yeah,
therapy.
honestly, I'm not. Wait, for me personally or for her?
No, for her.
You know what? I honestly don't remember
Mm,
anymore. Um, and I don't know. Yeah, I honestly don't know anymore. But I
so
will
it
say
was
mine continued. And that was ultimately when my mother did divorce him because they were going to counseling, and one night she saw him coming out of her
oh,
room.
yes. Mhm. And she went
So
ballistic and she left for a couple weeks.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And then
But
did she cut him out of the home after she came back, or was he still
I
in the
don't
home?
remember what the timing was on that because, like I said, it was a few years like in between the two, but it did happen. So again, at least she did. It took her a while, but she made the right choice, which
Mhm,
not everybody does. I mean, and I think people, unfortunately, all too often stay with the
mhm,
abuser, right?
mhm. Now, what was I gonna say? Is your mom still around? Is she still alive?
Yes, she is.
Has she worked out? Because I know she ended up marrying another winner.
She married. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, no, she clearly had a type. Um, My mother, there's no malice in my mother, but she's limited, right? I don't know
Mhm.
what her story is that made her the way she was. But
Did she end up
introspection. end up
Did she
what?
end up looking into what might have led her into these relationships or
No,
make
no.
up with you, or she's just not ready to okay.
Yeah, that's just
You've
not
had
her
to
way.
resolve your own
Exactly,
whatever
and I
around
really
her.
did get to that point in my where it's in my book too, where I realized that there is, and I was always very much like I felt like I raised myself, so I always knew the work that needed to be done was going to be done only by me, right?
Mhm.
And that's the nice thing though too about people if they're feeling like they want to kind of resolve things, but they want somebody else that they need to take accountability or whatever. You really don't. I mean, and that's it's great to have if you can, but the work in terms of accepting what happens to you can be done independently because let's face it, a lot of people, the perpetrator, whoever hurt you, they might be dead, they might just be so closed and unwilling and just completely not able to take in what they've done that they're never going to understand the toll that it took on you. So if you're looking to resolve your issues, you truly can do it on your own without
Mhm.
them.
Mhm. And there's a lot of different processes where you could put your mom in a chair across from you and then just take each other's roles. Where have you ever done that before wefore your
No,
mom
she is not.
No, not your mom, like, you wouldn't put her in the chair, but you'd envision your mom in the chair, and so you'd be dialoguing with her, and then you switch positions where you become your mom and she's talking to you. It's really pretty amazing and powerful. But, and then the last thing for your healing is always the forgiveness. It doesn't mean that you forget what they've done or, like, acknowledge what they but it's forgiveness in order to free yourself from holding on to, that because it keeps you stuck when you don't forgive somebody.
I had seen somebody who wore a shirt and it was amazing, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it was like basically by not forgiving someone, it's like taking poison every day and hoping the other person dies.
Yes, exactly. It is. It
Yeah,
is.
no, I agree. I agree, and it is important to come to a place of forgiveness, not for them, but for you.
Yep. Mhm. Well, wonderful. This has been such a really great conversation. I would love for people I know you mentioned it earlier in our conversation, where people can pick up your book and find you on social or your website.
Yeah, so if you go to my website, it's pattycabot.com, pattycabot.com. You can download my book for free as a PDF. I mean, if you wanted to, you can certainly buy it on Amazon or anywhere else. And I will be honest, I'm not great with social media, so I have a few videos on TikTok, but I'm not, and
Mhm.
Instagram and YouTube, but I'm not great.
Oh, well, it doesn't matter if you're great or not. It's social media. It just changed. Oh God, you
No, it's
cannot get
and
the
so
algorithm. It's awful. I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
good to like if you're following people and stuff, but I haven't really figured that out myself. So yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah,
find you on your website and go pick up your book.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Well, excellent. So, are you going to go on any kind of book tour, or are you going to do? Are you going? How do you plan to
You know, I've
continue
really
helping others?
I've really been trying to do it the way I'm doing it with you
Yep.
right now.
Mhm.
Like you have
Getting.
your community,
Yep.
and I feel like these are, our people, and
Mhm.
that hopefully it will resonate. And for those it does resonate for, that they know that it's out there.
Yes, it's the
And
best way to get it out to their audiences, and it lives there in perpetuum, unless you put it up on YouTube because they'll take it down 2 years later. I just got something censored, like, oh my god, I've gotten
oh,
4
really?
strikes. Oh, yeah, it was just about scalar energy, light energy, like, as far as healing, like, it's free energy that you get, like, Nikola Tesla talks about it. Oh, yeah, I got a strike, like, literally, it was up a year and a half. I'm like, I'm so tired of but luckily podcast platforms, they're not they're not censoring as much, so you can talk about anything. So even your healing, the different therapies, they could censor us for that too. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's going to
that's
be
true.
up there. Yeah, you're going to reach everybody's audiences, and you're going to help a lot of people. I have one more question before we go.
Yeah.
I ask all my guests this, and it's what does it mean for you to live with an awakened heart?
Well, that's a good question. I guess for me, one of the things that was always most important to me was to try to be open so that I could see what the universe wanted me to see, so that I could be who they wanted me to be, to
Mm,
live the life they want me to have. So I think that's it, to be open to love,
mm,
to be able to cultivate love in my life.
mhm. And the opening is where the light gets in. Beautiful. Well, thank you, Patty, for joining us today on the Wake and Heart podcast.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I appreciate your generosity and your support. It's been a lovely hour with you.
Oh, thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Awaken Heart podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, share it with a friend. And if you haven't already, head on over to your favorite podcast app to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have any comments, questions, or feedback, you can reach me at theawakenheartpodcast.com.